I'm really happy to be here tonight. This is a very, very important event. This is the inaugural meeting of a group that I hope will become strong and will help provide needed services for men and boys in Ottawa. And I really hope to see this group grow from strength to strength over the upcoming years. So this is our first event. And so I'd like to introduce the president of CAFE Ottawa, who is David Shackleton. David is a thinker and writer on gender and psychological growth. He was editor and publisher of Canada's gender equalism magazine Everyman, a men's journal, for 10 years. He's organized annual conferences across Canada. His original models of gender, codependence, and psychological growth form the foundation of numerous self-discovery workshops and events. So please welcome David Shackleton.
Thank you, Fred, and good evening. Nice to see so many here. A lot of faces from my past as well. Yeah. So, CAFE stands for the Canadian Association for Equality. And its slogan is, equality means equality for everyone. And in our current focus around equality in Canada, we tend to leave out men. And so CAFE has a focus on including men into the equality rubric. It was started a few years ago in Toronto, and now there's a chapter in Vancouver, and now a brand new one in Ottawa. I went to the opening of the the Centre for Men and Families in Toronto. So CAFE Toronto has put together a office space and a place where men and their families can go for support, for understanding, to talk about their things. They offer various kinds of workshops and support services. So this is a new thing in Canada. We've got lots and lots of services which are focused on women. Okay, well that was exciting.
Annoying, maybe.
I think we've shown that there's a need for different voices to be heard, because clearly they are threatening. So, as this is the inaugural event for CAFE Ottawa, I'd like to introduce the executive. The Vice President is Janice Fiamendo. She wasn't able to be with us tonight. The Benoit Gagnon is our treasurer. Hey. Peter Mills is our secretary. Brian Peter. And Grant Dingwall is responsible for fundraising and membership. I hope you'll be wanting to talk to him at the end of this. Okay, so CAFE Ottawa, we're brand new, and we're thinking about what we might be able to do. We want to be action-oriented. We want to make a difference. We want to be involved with public education, and in the public education side, we'll have events like this regularly. We have 4 planned for this year. This is the first. The next one will...
Hey, hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say.
Yeah, we know.
MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, hey, MRA, we don't care.
Coming to disrupt this meeting. So if you know if there's anybody that's coming in to disrupt this meeting, meeting. They're not welcome to the room. Do you understand that? Okay. I'll invite you all to leave. Thank you very much.
From when I first thought I wanted to write a book. And the process was involved because the thing I wanted to write about was gender equality and how men's issues should be part of gender equality. And when I started thinking about that, what I realized was that I need to explain somehow. I need to explain why it is the case that we don't see that already. Why it is that we think we're doing equality when we are focused on women's issues and largely ignoring men's issues. Why does that feel right to us? And so the book grew because I had to go into a whole bunch of psychology, social psychology issues. So I'm going to talk about just a part of chapter 5, which is part of my personal story and how I came to awareness of some of these issues. So I'll start with a story about a word that I invented. When I was a kid, I came across the word misled in a book. And not having met that word before, I made a wrong assumption. I thought that it must be the past tense of a verb to misel. To misel. So the word was miseled. And for several years I carried that word around in my head. And it felt right to me. It felt just the same as every other word. The fact that I never encountered that word in the present tense didn't tip me off because I wasn't looking to correct myself. I didn't think I had anything wrong. It felt right. So, anyway, my task here tonight is to unmisel us about gender. So I talked about it felt right to me. What does that mean? What do I mean by that? Because this is the heart of the issue of gender. What feels right to us? Think about a time when you were trying to remember the name of a friend. You forgot the name of a friend, you try to remember it. Somebody says, is it Jim? No, that's not it. Is it Fred? No. Is it John? Yes. Yes, it's John. What's the difference? How do you know? How do you know? One of them feels right and the others feel wrong. You've got no evidence, you've just got a feeling. At some level you recognize that this one is right and this one is not. It's pure feeling. And yet it's completely compelling. You know you're right. There's no doubt at all. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about feeling. I'm not talking about emotion tonight. We often use feeling to refer to things like anger and sadness. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the feeling that tells us what is true and what is not true in the world. Now, these feelings can be mistaken, just like my feelings about the word misel. Imagine you're in a store, or in Ottawa, and you see somebody come out of the store, a good friend of yours. And you wave, you say, "Hi, John." And he looks right at you, and turns around and hurries off the other way. So what do you think? Have I offended him? Is he mad at me? Maybe you're affronted. Maybe you're offended that he's ignored you. Then you go into the store. There's another friend in there. Says, "Hey, you just missed John. He had a cell phone call. His daughter was in an accident." It all falls into place. Whatever feelings you had, whatever upset you had, disappears as if it had never been. Because now you know what happened. It all makes sense. So now the feeling you have is aligned with reality. Before, maybe it wasn't. So these feelings about what's true are built on assumptions that we make about reality. They also are very strongly aligned with gender. And this goes back, I think, a long way. It goes back for generations, thousands of years. We've been shaped. Now, when I was at Nortel, there often used to be a time when a new mother, an employee, would bring her baby in for everybody to look at. And you know what would happen? All the women would get up, drop what they were doing, and go over and be fascinated by this baby, right? And the men, most of them, not all, but most of them, were not that interested. I wasn't. A bit older, bit of personality, I'd be getting interested. But a brand new baby. Now, what was going on for those people? Every woman that got up and went over and was fascinated by that, she didn't feel like she was being compelled by something in her from thousands of years ago that evolved so that women who were fascinated with babies were presumably better mothers, didn't drown them after they were born. That was put in us. But what I'm pointing to here is we don't notice it. All the guys, me, the other guys who weren't that interested, we didn't feel like our behavior was being shaped. We didn't feel like, oh, I've got to sit here. I'm being forced by my conditioning. We don't experience it ourselves that way. But we are that way. There's no other explanation for the fact that this is gendered behavior. So how is this behavior playing out in society today? Another story. This happened in Ottawa a few years ago, quite a few years ago, at the Glebe Community Centre. I was new into thinking about gender. My wife had left me a couple of years before, and I was trying to figure out my life, and so I went to something called the Ottawa Hall Men's Forum that met monthly. It was a place for men to come and talk about their lives. This particular evening, there were 3 women there, and that was unusual because normally it was just men. Anyway, the women had been invited to run the whole evening. And what they did was, they were actually from the Ottawa Rape Crisis Centre. And they wanted us to have a debate. And the debate was, although not all men are violent against women, all men benefit from violence against women. So we were to debate this. I hadn't thought about it before, so I thought about it then. I thought about when my wife left me. She did it in a strange way. We didn't have any kids. She told me she was taking our dog to the vet. And she went off with the dog. And then she called me up and said, I've left you. I said, why did you do it that way? I was afraid you'd be violent. I've never been violent in my adult life. So, my wife of 8 years didn't really know me. And I thought about that, and I thought, I sure didn't benefit from male violence against women in that situation, that my wife was afraid of me, and I didn't even know it. I couldn't think of any way that I could benefit. Anyway, so we started the debate. And the way it worked was that we were arbitrarily divided at first, and then we could cross the floor after we got debating to the side that we thought was right. I was already on the side that thought we didn't benefit, so I didn't need to cross the floor. But you know what? Some guys were crossing the other way. And I thought, that's amazing. I started really listening to what they were saying. They were saying things like, well, I benefit because I have more power in the relationship if my wife is scared of me. And I thought, wow, what kind of relationship are you in? Is that really a benefit? Is that something you want? Anyway, we ended up evenly split. And I thought, that's good, it's over. I learned something. I didn't realize that some guys thought that way. But it wasn't over, because the three women walked to the middle of the room and faced my group, guys who said that they didn't benefit from male violence against women, and they said, "You bastards, you are worse than the guys out beating their wives, and the guys in the strip clubs, and the guys using the prostitutes. You are worse than them because you are pretending to be growing into a new version of masculinity, to be developing yourselves, and all the time you're in denial of the benefits you're getting from the violent patriarchal system. You should be ashamed." Whoa! That was heavy. I was sitting there trembling, I'll tell you. That really shook me. And we tried to argue with these women. We tried to explain that we wanted to have equitable relationships. I remember one guy sitting there crying, saying, "I haven't seen my kids for 3 years because my ex-wife accused me of sexually molesting her." The woman said, "A woman would never lie about something like that." So, pretty tense, and it didn't go anywhere. The women left, quite offended that we didn't buckle down to them, and I left, and it played out this way. The women sent a letter to the organizers of the Ottawa Hall Men's Forum complaining about how they'd been abused. The Ottawa Hall Men's Forum organizers sent a formal apology by reply, and they renamed it to the Ottawa Hall Men's Forum Against Sexism. And it didn't last a whole lot longer. It became a feminist organization. Now here's why this was significant. Does this turn my life around? Why did it turn my life around? Because I saw something there. I saw that these three women were incredibly powerful. They were, first of all, they were running the whole event, the whole evening, and secondly, their shaming of us guys was devastating. They felt to me like rocks that we just pounded ourselves bloody against and made no progress at all. And yet, I also saw that they were sincere when they felt powerless. They felt abused. They weren't making it up. They really did. And so, I thought, this is bizarre. These women are simultaneously incredibly powerful and incredibly powerless. They're powerful, but they don't feel any of their power. They didn't feel it. And that was weird. You know, I spent a long time thinking about that. I wanted to understand it. So, a lot of things happened. I tell much more of this story in my chapter 5. 4 years later, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still trying to work it out. And I go to a workshop in Orangeville. It's a community building workshop. You had to pay money for this. There were about 2/3 of it were men and 1/3 women. And early in the process, one guy talked about how he had been doing badly, looking after his daughter, that he had not been able to reach out for help, and he had felt like he was doing a really poor job. And a woman in the workshop shamed him for that. Said, you know, for not reaching out for help like she had reached out for help. And other people stopped her. Other people said, "No, don't do that. We're not going to let you shame him that way." And that was great. But later on, in a break, that woman came to me. I don't know why she chose me, but she chose me. She came to me and she said, "Tell me what happened there. You know, explain to me how come they stopped me from doing that when other things that happened, like one guy saying, when you said that, I felt like ripping your face off, were not stopped. So I was getting close to the end of my process of figuring out what was all this thing about gender power. And I worked it out, talking to her. We were walking around the outside of the workshop space, and I worked it out. I said, shaming from a woman towards a man is huge. It's huge. But it's unrecognized how huge it is. You know, there's a cry that you've probably heard. Death before dishonor. It's a male cry. It's not a female cry. It's a male cry. Honor is important to men. And shaming is an attack on honor. And so I said to this woman, you know, we need to have 2 rules in workshops, all workshops. And I have had those 2 rules with all my workshops since. No violence, and that protects women's fears. And no shaming, and that protects men's fears. I was excited about that. I wasn't really paying attention to the woman, but anyway, that's what I told her. Anyway, you can guess what happened next. So the next session of the workshop, the woman said, I have to leave. I can't handle what happened in the break. A guy I went to for help, he abused me. And I just have to, I can't stay around. I have to leave. And for an hour and a half, I watched as every man, I don't know if it's every man, most of the men spent the workshop time reassuring this woman, pleading with her not to leave. And again, I saw this phenomenon of a woman being very powerful. The whole workshop, hour and a half, paid time, everybody abandoned what they were there to learn in order to plead with this woman to stay. Very powerful, and yet feeling none of that power, feeling abused, in fact, feeling like a victim. I watched that, and I wondered at it. At one point I spoke up. I said, I'm the guy she's talking about. No abuse of any kind took place. Nobody was interested in exploring that. A woman was hurting, and the men wanted to fix it. This is an example of the gendered behavior, what feels right, that I started talking about. What feels right, what felt right for those men was to address that woman's pain, to try to make it right for her. And so, this is how I came to understand what is going on between the genders. It happened that night, after that amazing workshop session, which, I forgot to mention, the woman did stay. After an hour and a half, she relented. She said, okay, I'll stay. And that night, I had a model come to me, and I'll show you what it is. I'm sorry that our computer technology didn't work. We're using this clunker here.
It really is a clunker.
No, we haven't got anything. Just a moment. It is plugged in. This does have 2 lamps. You can switch it this way, but now it's not like that. I'm afraid the focus on this isn't very good either. Can you read it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I need to talk a little bit about codependence. I was talking about how we are compelled by the sense of what feels right to us to do. And one of the ways that, I guess the psychological the psychological theory that talks about compulsions is the theory of addiction. And codependence is an addictive model. And what I suggested, or what came to me that night, and I have spent the last 16 or 18 years since then, checking out to make sure that it's true in society, and as far as I can tell, it works every time, is this model. So what we have is, in codependence, this explains what feels right for us to do. So I'm not saying that this exists somewhere inside us, I don't know that. What I'm saying is it explains how we do what we do, how the gendered processes manifest. So if you look at men's power, we'll start there because that one's familiar to us, and it's quite real. In codependence, what you do is you transact in relationships with men and women. You transact in order to get your needs met. And so men's area of authority has been physical, economic, and political. And this is familiar to us because this is what feminism has raised to us, and it's quite real. So what can you do with the physical power? You can reward, you can protect, or you can attack. You can, with the economic power, you can provide or abandon. With the political, you represent or oppress. Now this happens in micro situations, in intimate relationships, and in the wider society. This is what feels right to us to do until we work our way past it. I think it comes from a long, long way back in our history. And so what we see here is that the right-hand top box, the attack, abandon, and oppress, is what the whole of the women's movement is about. Those are real issues. I'm not denying them, they're real issues. But they're a quarter of the whole of the picture. Now, what about women's power? The big thing about women's power is that it's covert in this model. And that's why it isn't experienced as power. Women have moral power, emotional, and sexual. And what I'm suggesting is that these powers balance. Men's and women's powers balance. And that these powers are largely unconscious. They express themselves through us, through what feels right for us to do in the moment. So the moral power can be used to honor or to shame. The emotional power to nurture or abuse, the sexual power to favor or to reject. And the moral power is the biggest one. That's equivalent to the male's physical power. And that's the one that I mentioned that men are so vulnerable to. Women are very afraid of violence, and men are very, I can't say afraid because it's not a conscious thing, but are very, very vulnerable to shaming. And so this is how, as I understand it, this is how feminism has been able to control the discourse around gender, to focus on women's issues, which are real issues, but to deny the validity for the most part of men's issues because they have the moral power to say, this is what should be paid attention to, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. This is what's good and this is what's bad. It's men's issues, attack, abandon, oppress, that should be paid attention to, and women's, shame, abuse, reject, should not. It's being done sincerely. It's not a conspiracy. It's not an intention to mislead. It's sincerely felt. But it's not healthy. And so my book is about how does this work in lots of detail. I give lots more stories. I give lots more examples. And I look in detail at the movements, the men's movement, the women's movement, what they've done, how they've done it, under this understanding of a balance of power, where men have the overt power and women have a covert power. Men and women are in denial of women's power. Men and women are in denial of men's powerlessness. So what do we need to do? Well, one at a time, each of us. We need to look at this and recognize that our feelings about what's true, if it feels wrong to us, that feeling might itself be mistaken. That feeling might itself be coming from way back, be part of our gender programming. How do we find out if that's true? We think about it. Feeling is balanced by thinking. And thinking can take us to a new place. Feeling can. It feels to us like if we were wrong, we would notice. But that feeling is mistaken. Because feeling is about recognizing. It can only confirm what we already believe. If something that comes along that disagrees with what we already believe, it will feel wrong. But thinking is different. If we think carefully about it, we can go to a new place. We can examine this kind of thing. Okay. I think I'm going to stop there, and let's take questions. Let's have a conversation. Yes?
Hello. So I guess my first question would be, what's your definition of feminism? Because you seem to speak to a few personal experiences and a sort of narrow part of the overall movement and theory.
Definition of feminism. Feminism is I haven't thought about that. I talk about feminism's own definition in the book, and I take that apart. But what would be my definition of feminism? I would say it would be women's sincere understanding of the gender picture in society. However, mistaken. Sincere but mistaken understanding of the gender picture in society, of the balance of power between men and women. That's my personal definition. I just made it up. I haven't had one before.
Fair enough, fair enough. And just as a quick follow-up, because I think there might be a lot to be gotten out of a wider reading of feminism, because I can think, I study care ethics, which is a particular feminist school that perfectly captures what you're describing as women's power and puts it in terms of sort of relationships between genders. So, I mean, maybe it's just your talk's title, but it seems like your opposition to feminism writ large might be overreaching what is perhaps a valid criticism and picture.
Perhaps. Yes?
Yeah, I come from I'm an economist, so I come from a different perspective. And I'm just curious about your assumption that the behavior of not seeing power is an assumption that you see the power which is exercised. Why do you assume that it's not conscious and it's not utilized the way men use, let's say, economic power? We're very explicit how it's used in a company, how it's used in a government, that you use money, you use your financial power for very simple purposes. Why would not the females use their shaming power very, very precisely to further their career or money ambitions? Well, why would you assume that it doesn't exist?
Well, it's not an assumption, it's an observation. And I told those stories about how I carefully watched, for instance, the women in the Ottawa Hall Men's Forum shaming us men. And I saw that they felt sincerely powerless. I observed that. That's been my observation whenever I've looked at women speaking in that way. of distress and victim and fighting back. Yes?
I think when we feel powerless, then we use those things. We shame and we use our sexual energy. And when we finally come to our power, then we use we use it in positive ways.
I think
So
you're right.
It's kind of by definition. We wouldn't use it that way if we were more conscious about ourselves.
Yes?
Yeah. I have to tell you up front, I'm a feminist, and have been by my life, what's happened to me, and there's all kinds of jobs I wasn't offered. I'm 73, so in 1965, I had a baby, I got married, I had a baby. I applied for a job at the Ottawa Catholic School Board, and it doesn't matter which school, because I can't think of it, St. Joseph, I think, and it was for a one-year term. And the priest called me, and he liked my resume, he got it, blah, blah, blah. 2 hours before, 11 o'clock, I'm supposed to go there for the interview. He said, I just have one thing to ask you, are you married? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I'm not interviewing you, we don't hire married women. So my point, I was in a violent relationship, I had a baby, I was getting the stuffing beaten out of me, and I couldn't get employed. And that's one example, but then I get into the government. Within 3 weeks, I got this guy over sexually assaulting me. I don't mean he raped me, I mean he did something very inappropriate that I would, if it was today, I'd call the police. My point being, I'm a feminist, but I had to be. Because of my life, because of what's happened to me and my life and my friends. And I think, for me, all feminism is equality between the sexes, and women should be financially independent, and so should men. So if the relationship is bad, whether you're married, not married, whatever you are, you can get out of it.
Well,
Okay, I went to the government, I worked for 27 and a half years, I got my pension, I've got an Audi sitting downstairs in the garage, and I have a beautiful house. And I don't have any man, but he left me, let's be blunt here, because he was running around. So my point being is, I've been treated very badly by men. I'm not saying every man is bad. I'm saying that's my life experience. That's why I'm a feminist. And I'm not saying what you're saying and what I'm saying can't come together somehow, but I don't know.
can I respond to you?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I made a point of saying several times during my presentation that women's issues are very real. You know, the issues that feminism has raised, certainly years ago, less so today, but years ago, are real issues, you know, and they are about women's moving into men's traditional areas, like the workplace, okay? So, yes, I hear all that you've said, and I don't disagree with any of it. What I'm pointing to is saying that men's issues are just as real and just as big, but much less known. So, for instance, we have passed laws in Canada and in the United States that basically address these issues, that now it is illegal to discriminate between men and women in hiring. It is illegal to discriminate between them in salary. We have basically passed laws to guarantee equality in all of the areas of men's traditional responsibility. But we have found ways to not pursue equality in women's traditional areas where men want it. So, for instance, in the case of divorce and child custody, we have tender years doctrine, we have best interest of the child. We don't have a law that says shared parenting is what we should have between the father and the mother, right? So, why don't we? Well, feminists opposed it. So, what I'm saying is we need to address men's issues with as much gusto as we've addressed women's issues. That doesn't mean we stop addressing women's issues. We need to do them both.
I just have one final thing. Mr. Wonderful worked at Nortel. You probably know.
Yes.
First, thank you very much for a really interesting presentation and for a really innovative way of looking at the relationships between men and women. It certainly has given me some new insights, but it seemed to me that what you're primarily talking about is an understanding of what can affect the relations between men and women individually. I'm less convinced that you've captured the key factors that affect the relationships among men and women in society and in the political sphere. Just to take a different view than this lady sitting in front of me here, as far as I'm concerned and based on personal experience, there is manifest discrimination against men by the government through the family law system and the Divorce Act. And there's other types of discrimination against men in employment and against boys in the educational system and so on. It would take a very long discussion to explain all of that, but I've experienced and I've seen it. But, and if you ask why does that persist, in many cases it's because of the influence of feminist groups, and particularly in the Department of Justice. Department of Justice, for example, if you go and look in the family law division of the Family of Justice, there's not a single male lawyer there. It's all women, and they have consistently advised the government not to change the Divorce Act, notwithstanding many years of reports on that behalf. So, is the purpose of CAFE or of your group to pursue these issues of male-female relations almost as a psychological or interrelationship issue, or are you interested in getting involved in some of the political issues that affect men in society?
More of the politics for CAFE. Now, understand that we've done two things here this evening. We've introduced CAFE, and then we talked about my book and my personal theories. And I'm president of CAFE, but I'm not speaking as president of CAFE when I'm talking about my book. I'm speaking personally. So CAFE is interested in offering services to men and their families, and offering and political advocacy. Those are the two main focuses. For me, my journey has been about understanding what's going on in society. To speak to your first point about the difference between the individual relationship and the wider, I think that what feminism discovered, feminists discovered last century, was that the moral power that women have had in relationship with men that has balanced men's physical power. There's been a kind of a balance of power there. They discovered that that worked on the public stage of public politics. That they could shame men en masse into gender biased behavior, into supporting women's issues and ignoring their own. And so I think that this does explain the larger political dynamic as well. I mean, if you look at what feminism has given us, it's given us two words to make a really concise example. Two new words. One of them is feminism, which stands for the way everything should be. And the other one is patriarchy, which stands for everything that's wrong today. Notice that feminism is a female word. Patriarchy is a male word. So we've got this moral thing going on. And what I'm trying to do here is to step away from the moral thing and not about what's right and what's wrong, because I think that's a poor game. It's a finger pointing game. What I'm interested in is what works. So this model is a model in a health system. It's not a model in a moral system. Feminist model is a model in a moral system. It's about oppression. It's about what's wrong and what shouldn't be done. But I'm interested in a psychological understanding, in a health system. How do we work with this in a way that will move us forward? Let me say one more thing, because I forgot to put it in my presentation. And that is, this has been done before, changing from a moral to a health model, very successfully. And the group that did it was AA. 100 years ago, alcoholism was seen as a moral failing. It was moral degeneracy. It was lack of discipline. It was character defect. There were all kinds of organizations, the Women's Temperance League, the Anti-Saloon League, that were about reforming drunks. Okay? It didn't work. Nothing was working. And then two self-confessed drunks started something that came to be known as Alcoholics Anonymous. What did it do? They changed the notion of alcoholism from a moral failing, a character defect, to a disease. And for the first time, significant numbers of alcoholics started to recover. And they still are. It was probably the most powerful social movement of the 20th century. And I am hopeful that we can do something similar in gender. What we have now is we're stuck in a moral system, which is about what's wrong and finger pointing and addressing men because of their patriarchal power and their privilege and their abuse and all the rest, right? It's all finger pointing and it's all shaming and it's all not working. What do we do? What should we do? We should move to a health system, a health understanding. Thank you.
I like your framework a lot, and I think you're actually being too modest with it. Have you thought of expanding it to the use of women and children as human shields by the Palestinians against Israel, the moral thing? It works. And also the immigrant invasion of southern Europe by boatloads. And have you read Respai's Cant of the Saints? Because it covers all this moral. You should look at it either in English or French. Norman Shapiro's translation is the best one if you can get hold of it, because there's stuff in it that's missing from some of the later. But anyway, it's the idea of the use of women and children, of course, for the moral suasion on a massive scale of huge societies in a way that makes feminism, as you describe it, look like some sort of piddling little piker organisation. And you might be interested in expanding your framework to include all that material as well. And I can't help quoting Dr. Johnson, because he's always good for a quote, who in the 1770s or 80s said, "We can't give women the vote, they've got so much power already." And he spotted what you've maybe revived.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like your take on what happened tonight. The people that came to disrupt here, they seem to be really upset about men's consciousness raising. It seems to really disturb them. And, I'm just wondering what your thoughts about what happened here tonight might be.
Well, codependence is a funny thing. It's unconscious, but it's not. And so, for instance, if you challenge somebody on their cover story, every codependent has a cover story to explain their behavior in terms that reassure them. If you challenge them on that, they get upset, right? They get upset. Now, that upset tells you that at some level they know that it's a cover story. Otherwise they wouldn't get upset, right? There's nothing to get upset about it, it's the truth. But it's not at a level that they're in touch with. Their upset doesn't show them that it's a cover story. So it's a complex dance of consciousness and unconsciousness. So, what I think is happening for these people who are trying to disrupt is that they recognize at some level that this is challenging their cover story about gender in the world. It's challenging a power that they have right now because they have the moral
But it's
power,
also-
and it's largely unopposed.
It's also, though, it's a tactic that's now being used by a lot of the postmodern left. It's called no platform. You see this in a lot of universities where if they have a feminist speaker who is not supportive of prostitutes in the right way, they will shut down those meetings. And you see it where Ayaan Ali was not allowed to speak at Brandeis, and Condoleezza Rice was not allowed to speak. It's this whole concept of no platforming. And it's a very, very dangerous thing that's going on.
I think we're in a dangerous time, I really do. But I want to emphasize again that this is coming from a sincere place. I think these people genuinely feel that they are defending the right and the good. Just a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to point out that what came up as an insight during your presentation was that it seems like a moment of mutual hardening happening right now when the two parties come to a clash. And I think maybe one part of the history of the question, of the issue, is that women starting to integrate into a male, predominantly male working force face a lot of hardship and a lot of big boy games and stuff that is really difficult for women. And this hardening in women happened. They realized that they have to oppose force by force. And obviously men also will react in a hardened way. And the resolution for the phase, for me, is to look at each other clearly and to start looking at this, removing this hardening obstacle between and start a dialogue and to focus on all the positive things about creating a dialogue between the two parties.
Absolutely.
And an understanding.
Yes.
So for a slightly different take, I think one of the things that's happened to men is that men have been disempowered in their work and their lives by the structure of our society, right? Men don't go out and work anymore, right? They don't inhabit their bodies anymore. They sit in offices and push buttons. And simply, right, like the physical was power, and at a really fundamental level, men are very dissociated from their bodies and from their physical and from the power that comes with being a strong man. And I think that causes so much pain in men. And that has nothing to do with specifically gender identities or roles.
It's technology.
It's just, it's the world that we've created. And it disempowers everybody, really. But I think men suffer that way particularly.
I think you're right. Sorry, I'm going to go to the next one.
Dialogue that I'm seeing that throw me eyes on. Okay, so you're expressing what you're seeing going on, reactions and the like from women, feminists, you know, and like, and you want to have a discourse, like a discussion with them. I mean, you had that big failed one that happened some years ago. But I mean, to have a real discussion, like where people are meeting on equal grounds, what do you think needs to happen in order to get that to occur? Because so far, as what I see, there's an imbalance.
That's a really good question. It's a tough one. The problem is this feeling that I started out talking about. You know, in this codependent dynamic, we can get completely stuck in a sense that we have the absolute right answers, and there is therefore no point to a dialogue. You know, the people who were sitting here and heckling us were convinced that they had the answer. They felt entitled to do that because we are completely wrong. I asked them if we could have a dialogue. I asked them if we could make a deal, and they were not interested in that at all. So what needs to happen is some softening in that position from thinking about it. You can have a dialogue with anybody who's willing to dialogue.
Should we have a discussion in CAFE? You know, ask questions about CAFE.
Let me just finish. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if in the future there will be those types of dialogue, because there are self-identified feminists right now engaging and discussing. So it's not like there's a polarized version of men's rights movement or feminist movement. There are the gray zone.
Yes.
And I'm interested in hearing the spectrum. And saying that it can't happen is fallacious because it's happening right now.
No, we'll work with the gray zones. We'll talk with anybody who's willing to talk. Absolutely. That's what we're about.
Just one more. Oh, did you answer your question?
No.
Oh, go ahead then.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, just quickly, one point that I really get, and that basically is an argument for all of this, is that in helping men heal, identifying the wounds and healing, it helps women. I mean, as when men heal, as I said before, when women are unbalanced and feel victimized, we use our power in a terrible way. And men do too. And if they heal, they'll use their power in a good way. And the second one is that I was disturbed in how we responded to these young people. I think it would have been very powerful if we had seen that they were young, they didn't know, and that we could have kind of opened somehow to them in a way that they would have left feeling differently.
That's impossible.
No, it's not impossible.
Absolutely
No, I
impossible.
don't think so.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I've seen it.
I spoke to them and they started to dialogue.
Good question for Cafe, and
It
I'll
was
look
not
at
hard,
something.
it was not hard to do. But when we are angry and yell back, it escalates.
No, I don't think anybody should be angry and yell back,
But
definitely
we
not.
did that, but we did that.
Some people did, and I think
Some
that was
people
the
did.
wrong,
But-
But I didn't, I asked people to not do that.
Yes,
Yeah, I went to talk to them as well.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm not saying not to call the police and that, but that's all, I just wanted to say.
I mean,
Go ahead.
in an ideal world, I would have liked to have spent more time, but we didn't have more time. We needed to get back to our agenda.
I agree, I just
Yeah.
mean about the response. It would have made a difference. And that's why I think answers some of the question of how do we dialogue. If somebody's upset, you listen and listen and listen, and it winds itself out.
But again, we've got to be careful because we can spend all of our time listening.
I didn't mean we could do that tonight. I just thought we shouldn't have yelled.
All right.
Yes, I have a couple, but I'm just gonna ask two. One, I didn't catch the title of your book, and two, regarding the anecdote you gave earlier about where one woman stood up and stated that she wanted to leave, but then after
Yes.
an hour and a half of convincing, she decided to stay. If there is a tendency or several examples of women using exhibited distress in order to get results of whatever kind, what mechanisms might men be using or have been observed to use to get similar results? What tools are in the men's toolbox that get the same kind of results?
That's a good question. Yeah, it is a good question, and the answer is that men's authority and men's strength and threats and things like that are what men use, and more overt. What we were talking about with the woman there was a covert strategy. It was a manipulative strategy, but it wasn't a conscious strategy. It was just what felt right. So men's strategies tend to be overt, although they can be passive aggressive and they can be covert as well. But women's strategies tend to be covert, although they can be direct and they can be overt.
Name of the book.
Name of the book: The Hand That Rocks the World. And the subtitle is An Inquiry into Truth, Power, and Gender. So I'm sorry, but we need to cut it off because of time. We have to be out of this room by 9, and we want to give people an opportunity to buy books and look at and sign up to.
Ask about CAFE and discussion on CAFE.
Do you want?
Yes.
Okay, well, I just want to use the remainder of the time to, if there's any comments about who we are, CAFE, what you think we should be doing, ideas, for future events, et cetera, we're all ears for this sort of discussion about the overall organization.
What are you planning?
What are we planning? Well, it's early days, so I think there's a variety of people, other authors who have written books who have expressed interest in coming to speak to us. I think we'll do more starting in the fall, because I don't think we'll do much in the summer. We really want to spend a lot of time on campus and try to get students involved into the group, and hopefully get a student group active at Carleton and University of Ottawa.
Are you going to build a center for men and families?
We'd like to build a center for men and families, one step at a time. So hopefully we'll get more and more people involved, and we'll get bigger and bigger events and more people involved in the planning. We need people to come aboard and help us plan and manage, and hopefully that will lead to that step of a men's center. And it's very exciting, but we want people to get involved. Guy?
Do you got a funding model?
Do we have a funding model?
Well,
No, we do not have a funding model. We're going to rely upon, and again, a good example, tonight it was a free event. If we are looking for donations, contributions, to help cover the cost of tonight, because we had to pay for this room. So if anybody wants to donate some money to CAFE, we greatly appreciate it. We're also a charity, so we do give out tax receipts for donations to CAFE. So I heartily recommend people do that. tonight, we could take all the information up at the desk for a donation and make sure you get a tax receipt. Yes?
Just a interesting question you're asking about possible future work to do.
Yeah.
The thing that jumps into my mind right away would be, I know a lot of women aren't feeling well served by feminist orthodoxy.
Yes.
And a lot of men aren't feeling well served by the masculine orthodoxy either. So to kind of call all the people who are feeling excluded by the gender conversations and to, have a broader conversation rather than having the orthodoxies duke it out. But just as humans, where are you not feeling served by this?
Well, it's a very good point, and I think what we hope to do again is not so much, get into this sort of anti-feminism mode, but get into a discussion on suicide in Canada, a discussion on child custody, a discussion of some of the issues where we can bring more equality into it, because again, there are male issues and there are female issues, and both issues need to be addressed.
I'll just say, really along the lines of the Truth and Reconciliation, to really allow the stories of men and women to come out.
Well,
maybe a forum for
absolutely,
that,
and
but
so
to allow the personal stories rather than the kind of, the
Theory.
Yes,
theory.
and I really hope that we'll get, you'll see in some of the authors we have planned, people who are going to come in and, again, tell us stuff that you probably haven't heard.
that'll only work because CAFE Ottawa wants to do it. I mean,
Yes.
Have some workshops, get David to do some workshops.
Okay, workshops. Again, these are a very good idea, so hopefully that's something that could definitely be done. Yes?
I think that a more conscious, a precondition to a more conscious conversation needs to be coming from a place of personal power on both sides. If women feel empowered, they can have a more conscious message and understanding. If men feel empowered and come from this place in the dialogue, then they can be mutually heard and they can be mutually understood.
Well, again, that's why we're hoping, this is a Canadian Association of Equality, and hopefully that will empower everybody to come out and be part of this, both men and women.
Maybe you could reach out to the Orthodox feminists.
We don't have to, they know about us already.
Those aren't the Orthodox feminists, no.
We could discuss how to do that, but as we do more and more events, we'll see what happens. Yes.
What does CAFE want to promote? Like, I understand they want to promote, more egalitarian laws, family laws about divorce and child custody.
Yeah.
Okay, what are some of the other things?
Well, let me give you one example. Take suicide. Most people don't realize that 75% of suicides in Canada are men and boys. 75%. But when you go to, let's say, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, or the political parties, they all have suicide prevention strategies. But none of them talk about a differential strategy that tries to understand why are so many men and boys committing suicide. They're completely oblivious to the fact that there is a gender gap in suicide. And so these are the sort of issues that we want to raise awareness of, so that we can start to have, because maybe there should be a different set of strategies to deal with boys and men and try to understand why this is happening so much. The statistics are quite startling. And you look at a number of other issues, hopefully we'll get to obesity, which affects boys more than girls. Look at the prevalence of ADHD and drugs like Ritalin being used mostly for boys as opposed to girls. So these are the sort of issues that, again, we need to be aired and discussed and brought out and see where we can go.
And the men's centers.
Speak up, Ed.
The men's shelters, that sort of thing. The fact that there's a need for men's shelter.
Well, there is definitely a need for men's shelter, and that's definitely something on our agenda, because spousal violence is a horrible thing, and there's a lot of facilities in Canada for women and very, very little for men. So it's like, again, there's a lot to discuss and a lot on our plate, and that's
a change in attitude towards men and promote services that cater to men and also to help change laws that discriminate against men, that kind of thing. You're not trying to not trying to reverse feminism, are you?
Well, no, I mean, look, the original point of feminism, when feminism first started, it was all about equality. It was a very, very important movement because at that stage, it was all about changing sex roles between men and women, and that early feminism helped both men and women. It was good for both sexes. It's gone off the rails, and now we have to go and understand the men's issues that have been ignored, and get on, again, equality, again, because there are legitimate issues affecting women in this country, and there's legitimate issues affecting men, and they both deserve attention. Yes?
Do you think it might be a fair way to describe the situation in very broad, very general terms, for there to be essentially three main branches of looking at dialogue and relations between the sexes? Traditionalism, which is your standard old-fashioned way of doing things, where both men and women really locked down to their roles and you couldn't deviate from them no matter what, no matter who you were. Whereas feminism coming up relatively recently, which was all about freeing women from the roles and responsibilities that were restricting them, which in and of itself is not a bad thing, but ended up offloading a lot of those roles and responsibilities and the negative aspects onto men who were still fairly locked down. And this new, relatively new men-directed way of focusing on things, which is ideally in a perfect world would have all the best aspects of feminism in regarding loosening the restrictions and bonds.
Well, I don't know if I put it all in that way. I mean, I think feminism was all about equality of opportunity when it started. That's that women could go to university, women could take up careers, women could have all the choices in front of them that men had. So that is very important, and so I don't want to lose that. Equality of opportunity for everybody is very, very important. And when things get in the way of that equality of opportunity, that's where we have to look in and examine those issues. So we have a sign-up sheet. If you haven't signed our sheet, sign up, come out. We need people to help manage and advise, and thank you very much for coming, and I hope it was a good evening.
Yeah.